Here we have the Crusaders, formerly known as the Jazz Crusaders, an American jazz fusion group that started performing in the 1960s. Now, if you're looking for a band that's been together for almost 50 years, nominated for 9 Grammy nominations, and a number of songs that hit the charts back in the day, you came to the right place. This video will examine the life and music of the Crusaders. Welcome back to my channel. The Crusaders, formerly known as the Jazz Crusaders, were an American jazz fusion group performing from the 1960s to the 2010s. Known firstly from the 1960s inceptions of the Jazz Crusaders, they eventually renamed themselves in 1971 to simply the Crusaders. A wide range of genres such as jazz, R&B, jazz rock, the blues, and jazz funk are cohesively featured on the group's albums. The Crusaders have also copped a total of 9 Grammy nominations. High school friends Joe Sample on piano, Wilton Felder on tenor sax, and Nesbert Sticks Hooper on drums formed their first band together, the Swingsters, at Wheatley High School in Houston, Texas in 1954. While studying at Texas Southern University, they played a mixture of jazz and R&B and were joined by Wayne Henderson on trombone, Hubert Laws on flute, and Henry Wilson on bass. The group soon turned more to hard bop and renamed themselves the Modern Jazz Sextet, but also recorded in more of an R&B vein as the Nighthawks. In 1960, Sample, Felder, Hooper, and Henderson moved to Los Angeles and formed the Jazz Crusaders as a quintet with a succession of different bass players. Influenced by musicians such as Cannonball Adderley, Art Blakey, and John Coltrane, the band signed to the Pacific Jazz label in 1961 and released 16 albums on the label over the subsequent 8 years. With a front-line horn section of Felder and Henderson, the group's sound was rooted in hard bop, but with a slant towards R&B and soul music. Their first 2 albums with Jimmy Bond on bass were Freedom Sound in 1961 and Looking Ahead in 1962, followed by the live album At the Lighthouse in 1962 and Tough Talk, the first of several albums with bassist Bobby Haynes. In all, the group recorded 5 live albums in the 1960s, 4 of which were recorded at the Lighthouse Cafe in Hermosa Beach. They also had their first chart entry, their treatment of Stevie Wonder's Uptight, Everything's Alright, reaching number 95 on the Top 100 in 1966. The group's 1969 album, Powerhouse, was their first to reach the Billboard 200 album chart, reaching number 184, and was also their last studio album for Pacific Jazz. The group then signed on with the Chissa label, co-owned by trumpeter Hugh Masekela and producer Stuart Levine. Their 1970 album, Old Socks, New Socks, reached number 90 on the album charts and was their last as the Jazz Crusaders. The decision was taken to call the group simply the Crusaders so as not to limit their scope and potential audience. After a second album with Chissa, Pass the Plate in 1971, the one album for the Mo West label, Hollywood in 1972, they signed with Blue Thumb Records, where they remained until the late 1970s. The Crusaders released the album Crusaders 1 in 1972, including Put It Where You Want It, covered by the Average White Band in 1973. Their recordings increasingly adopted a jazz funk style. They incorporated electric guitar and bass into their shows and recordings, as well as using samples of electric piano and clavinet. Guitarist Larry Carlton joined and featured on their albums in the early part of the decade. Bass duties were often handled by Felder, with Max Bennett contributing in the early to mid-1970s and Robert Pops Popwell joining later in the decade. According to jazz critic Scott Yanow at AllMusic, however, after a few excellent albums during the early part of the decade, the group began to decline in quality, he said. Sample later commented that the group was under commercial pressure from record companies to record jazzed-up versions of contemporary popular songs. Henderson left to become a record producer in 1975, and the other musicians regularly and increasingly worked as session musicians with artists such as Jackson 5, Marvin Gaye, Joni Mitchell, Steely Dan, and Randy Newman. With a growing crossover appeal, the group's most commercially successful recordings included the single Put It Where You Want It, which reached number 52 on the pop charts in 1972, and the albums The Second Crusade, which reached number 45 in 1973, Southern Comfort reached number 31 in 1974, including Stomp and Buck Dance, and Chain Reaction reached number 26 in 1975, though Southern Nights reached number 38 in 1976, and Images reached number 34 in 1978. The peak of the group's commercial success came with 1979's Street Life with Randy Crawford as featured singer. The album peaked at number 18 on the pop album charts, and the title track made the top 10 on the R&B chart, number 36 on Billboard's Hot 100, and number 5 in the UK. Later albums by the group featured singers Bill Withers and Joe Cocker. The live 1982 album, Royal Jam, featured guitarist B.B. King, bassist James Jamerson, and the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. Hooper left in 1983, and though Felder and Sample kept the group operating through the 1980s, the group's commercial success diminished. Felder and Henderson reunited in the mid-1990s as the Crusaders. Henderson later led a band called the Jazz Crusaders, in which Felder and Carlton also played, and Felder and Sample reunited as the Crusaders in 2003. I hope you enjoyed this video on one of my favorite American jazz fusion groups of all time, the Crusaders. Now, if you've got a band or musician you'd like featured on this YouTube channel, pop it in the comments section. I'll make another video. Thanks for dropping by. Rock on.